The winter of 1914 marked one of the darkest early chapters of the First World War. What many European leaders and military planners had confidently predicted would be a short, decisive conflict had instead collapsed into a grinding stalemate. Along the Western Front, opposing armies faced each other across a scarred landscape of mud, barbed wire, and hastily dug trenches stretching from the North Sea through Belgium and into France. By December, the soldiers, British, German, and French alike, were exhausted, disillusioned, and keenly aware that the war they were fighting bore little resemblance to the patriotic visions sold to them months earlier. Against this bleak backdrop emerged one of the most extraordinary episodes in modern military history. It is the story, the Christmas Truce of 1914. Conditions that made the result of this truce making even possible were not anything high command decisions or diplomatic overtures could have come about. Instead, they grew organically from the shared misery of trench warfare. The early months of fighting had produced appalling casualties and little territorial gain from any side. Soldiers lived in waterlogged trenches plagued by cold, vermin, and disease. Supplies were inconsistent, morale was fragile, and the psychological strain of constant artillery fire and sniper attacks weighed heavily on even the most hardened men. As Christmas approached, many soldiers found themselves thinking not of victory or glory, but of home. The warmth of family and tradition that felt impossibly distant from where they were at the front. The truce began not with formal agreements, but with small human gestures. On Christmas Eve, German soldiers in several sectors began placing candles on the parapets of their trenches and singing familiar carols such as Stille Nacht, or Silent Night in German. The sound carried across no man's land, and surprisingly, British troops who initially suspected a ruse started singing, meaning the songs with songs, not the gunfire that had been going off for days and months. Applause of English carols sang in response, and a fragile sense of trust began to take hold. In some areas, handwritten signs appeared above the trenches bearing messages like, "You no shoot, we no shoot." These tentative overtures marked the first cracks of a rigid hostility that had defined the front. Then, as Christmas Day dawned, a truce spread into a piecemeal fashion across various sections of the Western Front. Soldiers cautiously climbed out of their trenches, hands raised, unsure of what awaited them. What they encountered was not enemy fire, but men much like themselves. They were muddy, they were tired, they were curious. In numerous locations, troops met in no man's land to exchange greetings, some handshakes, and share small gifts, such as cigarettes and chocolates and buttons and badges changing hands in the process. Some soldiers showed photographs of their families. Others attempted halting conversations in broken English or German. You would see just how funny that was at the time, but it was tried. For a brief moment, national identities blurred, replaced by shared experience of being young men far from home. One of the most enduring and often debated images of the truce associated with this time is that an impromptu football match played between opposite sides. While the details vary depending on the accounts, basically what side wants to talk about it, there's credible evidence that several informal games actually took place, particularly in sections held by British and German units. Using makeshift balls, soldiers kicked and chased in the frozen mud, laughing and cheering as if they were back in their villages and fields, playing like kids, not in a killing zone or facing each other. Whether the matches were organized contests or spontaneous kickabouts matters less than that they symbolize a reclaiming of normalcy and play in an environment defined by destruction. Truce also served a practical purpose. With the fighting pause, soldiers took the opportunity to recover for their bodies their comrades who had fallen in no man's land while the fighting was going on. And of course, after having them lie there for weeks, they were able to do something that was a bit more dignified with their comrades. Joint burial services were held. Some sectors had prayers, others in multiple languages because all were gathered. The moments were among the most poignant of the truce as they underscored the shared cost of the war. Standing side by side over shallow graves, soldiers were confronted with the uncomfortable truth that those they were meant to hate were mourning the losses just as personal and painful as their own. Despite its spread, the Christmas truce was far from universal. In many areas, particularly where fighting had been essentially bitter and very hard, officers enforced strict discipline. Hostilities contained, and they were not unabated. French troops, whose land had been invaded and whose civilian population had suffered directly, were often less inclined for fraternization. Even where truces occurred, they varied in length, some lasting only a few hours, others extending through Christmas Day, and in some cases into following days. Importantly, the truce was never officially sanctioned by military leadership on either side. High command reacted with unease and in some cases outright alarm once reports of fraternization filtered back to the home fronts. Generals feared that such displays of camaraderie undermined discipline and their willingness to fight. Orders were soon issued reminding troops that the enemy was still their enemy, regardless of shared traditions or any temporary goodwill. In subsequent years, efforts were made to prevent any repetition of the 1914 events. Artillery bombardments were scheduled deliberately on Christmas Day, and units were told to reduce the likelihood of familiarization with opposing forces. As the war grew more brutal, the conditions that had allowed the truce to occur disappeared. The Christmas Truce did not end the war, nor did it simply alter its course. Within days and sometimes hours in some places, soldiers returned to their trenches and resumed fighting. Yet the episode has endured precisely because of its limited scope. It stands as a powerful reminder that even in the midst of industrialized warfare, human empathy can surface in unexpected ways. The men who participated did not suddenly abandon their sense of duty or forget the realities of combat. Rather, they demonstrated that beneath uniforms and national loyalties, common humanity does persist. In the century since, the 1914 Christmas Truce has taken on symbolic significance far beyond its immediate impact. It has been commemorated in literature, film, music, and public memory as an emblem of peace and the possibility of reconciliation. At times, it risks being romanticized, stripped of its surrounding horror of trench warfare. Although when you understand it in its full context, its meaning becomes richer, not simpler. The truce was not a naive rejection of reality. It was a brief assertion of moral agency by individuals caught in forces far larger than themselves. Ultimately, the Christmas Truce endures because it complicates our understanding of war. It actually challenges the notion that conflict is sustained solely by hatred and reminds us that wars are fought by people who are capable of choice, also compassion and restraint, even if it's in temporary situations such as this one. In the frozen fields of the Western Front, amid barbed wire and broken ground, soldiers paused just long enough to see one another not as enemies, but as actual human beings that they were as well. That pause, that short respite of time, fleeting as it was, remains one of the most profound moments in the First World War and a lasting testament to the resilience and the shared humanity of the darkest of times.